This half hour being brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors, Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, Kia, Hyundai. I went with Ford and had just a tremendous experience from the variety to the sales staff to the financing. Everything just fell into place exactly right because they're pros over at our good friends at Sunbury Motors. Great pre-owned inventory. Lots filled with them, and each one gets the Sunbury Motors guarantee, which eases your buying experience to go over each vehicle on the lot. And a terrific service department, whether it's inspections or routine or difficult. They handle it all at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury, Sunbury Motors Kia. Routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. The Steelers may have changed quarterbacks, but we don't change with Neal Coolong. Sir, welcome.
As always, it is excellent to be here. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day.
Doing great. And Neal, let's start with this. They make the change, which is naturally going to be scrutinized anyway. And through the first quarter, there was going to be scrutiny. In the end, even though it's a one-game sample size, what did Russell Wilson add that Justin Fields, in your opinion, did not?
You know, I think oftentimes in football, you hear the adage about baseball. You know, at the MLB level, every team's going to win 60 games, except the White Sox, of course.
Yeah.
Every team's going to lose 60 games.
Mm-hmm.
What you do with those remaining 40, 41 games is what separates the good from the bad. In a lot of ways, looking at a quarterback's cumulative stats, which I feel Justin Fields got the favor of through the first 6 weeks of the season, doesn't really tell the story. Now, Fields had a better statistical game in some instances than Wilson did this past week. But the big thing was there were 4 or 5 plays. Wilson made something happen, and it was a net positive gain to the team. Sometimes bigger, sometimes not really all that big of a deal. But it's more the absence of the losses that I feel like Fields would have taken in that instance. One of them was a bigger play down the field. I think he completed it to Freiermuth. He evaded a rush, which, let's be honest, I don't think it was the best night for pass rush for the Steelers' offensive line. But Wilson evaded the rush in a very slick way. As he did that, though, he got rid of the ball short. He had Freiermuth where Freiermuth should have been in that situation, whereas I feel like Fields might have avoided it, but he would not have gotten rid of the ball that quickly. Didn't see it, whether he didn't react quick enough to it. Wilson is able to do that, and I think that's the reason why the Steelers favored Wilson in the first place this offseason, bringing him in first, kind of more or less declaring him the starter, versus Fields. I think Wilson just has that veteran savvy. He sees the field a little bit better. I point out, though, before everyone's talking Super Bowl with this team like they are now, we saw there are some deficient physical abilities in Wilson. He does not have the arm that he used to have.
Right.
Not that it was ever phenomenal or anything, but it was good. It's lessened a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of those moonshots George Pickens is going to come down with. It was pretty remarkable. He came down with as many as he did. To say nothing of the first quarter, which was a complete dumpster fire for their offense, not in a completions way, but in an execution way, in an operations way. They were all off the page. Credit to Wilson for hanging into that. Credit to Arthur Smith for getting it fixed, because it obviously looked a lot better in the second half. I just feel overall Wilson made those extra maybe 5 plays that I don't think Fields would have made. And those were the difference in the game ultimately, because you look at the chain reaction of it. It's one play versus taking a sack or throwing the incompletion. More yards sets up a more desirable next down situation. They move the chains. They end up getting one more big play out of it. They end up scoring 7 instead of 3 or 0. And I think that's really been what's held Fields back. It's a couple plays that he doesn't see to make or he isn't willing to try to make. and Wilson made all those. And to his credit, I think Wilson probably got away with a little bit. He took some gambles that all went the Steelers' way. And, usually when that happens for your quarterback, you're on the winning side of the game. It might not happen this week. I'm not sure how much they want to rely on all of that, but the fact that Wilson kept the drive alive, kept plays alive, and turned them into positives, I really think was the difference. A couple times a game, Fields wouldn't do that. I think it ultimately stalled their offense out and led them to that, they're hovering around 20-point per game average. And with Wilson, I think they have more ability to get that extra touchdown a game, which they're going to need. And that's really been the difference. I mean, you look at it throughout the last couple of years, how much better would this team be with one more touchdown a game? How many more games would they have been able to win? How many more would not have had to have been so dramatic? Let their pass rushers tee off on the opposing quarterback on a final drive for once. Wilson brings that. I don't think Fields was quite there in his time, so clearly the right move. And it was not a sharp offensive game overall. They've got work to do, and they know that. You take the emotion out of it. You rewatch it. I think you'll see they missed opportunities. They screwed things up, and they're things that they need to get fixed in practice. But they're obvious types of things. I think there are things that they can improve from, and you can expect a little bit more competitive of an offense moving forward.
See, what I take away from it, you can see the touch throws and so forth, because Fields, for the most part, does throw the ball in a line. It's just the way he throws the ball. But what struck me was the Steelers scored the last 5 times they had the ball. The key to me is, Neal, 4 of the last 5 were touchdowns, not field goals.
Yeah, that really says it all, doesn't it? I mean, how many times have you been in a situation with a Steelers game, second half, they've played really well all year, defensively in particular. This one was no different. They had the opportunity to put the opponent away early. They get stops on defense. They make plays on the ball, give it back to the offense. Now it's time to go for the throat. They actually did it. Kept doing it over and over, even to the point where the game is completely out of reach, and they're still trying to score touchdowns. I thought that was great. By the way, you're going to go for it on 4th down because you're not going to kick a field goal. So try to make something happen. That's great. They executed really well in the second half, and they were able to finish stuff. And you saw it. I mean, just you look at Najee Harris at the end of the game. Look at I'm not a body language guy, but just look how excited he is. They finally closed the game out in a way that they could have a couple times this season. The offense got it done the same way that the defense did. And as you and I have talked about many times, this was a game where legitimately T.J. Watt made one play.
Right.
I mean, we'll get into it a different time. I'm sure Jets Radio is talking about this. The wisdom of setting your entire offensive game plan to stop one pass rusher, right, which they were pretty successful in doing, but they didn't do anything else. It limited them greatly. That's the impact that Watt can make without statistics, and that's the kind of thing you need to look at when assessing his overall value. But defensively, they were able to basically choke the Jets out, while the offense finished off whatever was left of what's typically a very good defensive unit. So that this was an understandably big performance, not just win for the Steelers.
No question. And Beanie Bishop had a couple of interceptions in the game. There are moments where I'm asking myself, I know Rodgers is limited right now. I mean, it's the last thing he'll admit, because if I'm in his shoes, I don't admit it either. But I mentioned he's a 40-year-old coming back from an Achilles. That's not easy to do. My question is how well is he seeing the field, Neal?
I wonder if he's seeing it and doesn't trust his ability to go for it.
Yep.
In a way, I remember, what's that against? The Lions, I think. The Lions. I forget what team it was, but Roethlisberger, in his final year, he is a Colts. It was a Colts game. Because Phillip Rivers looked exactly the same on the other side of the ball. It was obvious that Ben was done. His first half was like, he can barely do anything. I have said, and it's just my opinion, it was like Roethlisberger went into the locker room, shot in his elbow, got in each knee, and came out, and all of a sudden he was firing bullets. was he made a throw third quarter of that game as if he was saying, for everybody who thinks I'm done, I'm giving you this one. And it was a beauty. He put it on a line. It was about 30 yards down the field. It was a great throw, but he wasn't making those throws. Right. First thing you probably want to question is the game plan. Is he supposed to make those throws? Like, well, it's Ben Roethlisberger in his final season. I don't think he's, doing a whole lot of what he doesn't want to do, if Rodgers has the physical ability to, I don't know if he has the confidence in it, but I will say this about Beanie Bishop's, the first interception. That was just a phenomenal play by Bishop. And you saw it. They had a great camera shot of it from basically Rodgers' vantage point. You couldn't really see Bishop, but you see the ball is directly on a line, and it's hot. He fired it off good. He's going to hit the receiver square between the numbers. Mm-hmm. It's a great throw. Bishop just out of nowhere spears it. I thought Rodgers in this game played well. The other interception, whether Bishop got a paw on it up in the air, whether it distracted Quincy Williams, I don't know, but it bounced off his chest plate. The throw was right there, straight to Bishop, which, the perfect testament of, if you work hard, luck tends to favor you, and that's what happened on that. Another, Rodgers is going to get deducted for that as far as having 2 interceptions overall, but he played well in this game. Yeah. He is not making those big down-the-numbers throws that he used to, which is interesting because I know there's certainly one team that would love to have 2 receivers to the level of the ones that the Jets have. Yeah. They didn't utilize them, really. They couldn't run the ball particularly well, and you would have thought putting it on Rodgers' shoulders could have helped them, keep pace in the second half, but they couldn't do that either. And keep in mind, this is a game where James Pierre was on the field for a large chunk of it in the second half. I don't think there was really a real excuse that the Jets can have schematically to have not done more. And Rodgers, is kind of finding out how the other half lives. If you want to treat the media that way for that long, they're going to come back after you, and you are going to be held accountable after every game, which is what's happening now. The irony is he played well. He did a good job in this game. The Steelers' defense was just everywhere. In typical the Steelers at home on prime time fashion, they play really well in those games. Typically, I know they lost the Dallas game earlier, but over the time in Mike Tomlin's career, they've typically put up games like we saw on Sunday. And in this case, the last 4, 5, 6 years, it tends to be a bit abnormal compared to where they are. So it's good for them to have another one. But as far as the Jets go, Rodgers can get the job done for what he needs to do. But if he's going to have to bomb the ball 40 yards down the field playing catch-up, I don't know they're going to do a whole lot better than 2-5 in the next 7 games.
All right, so that brings up the next part, and that is when you watch the 49ers play the Chiefs, they got bound by the goal line. We know Andy Reid always tries to do something different around the goal line. And they put Carson Wentz in the game along with Mahomes in an unusual formation, and he didn't score in the play. And remember, I've already pointed out the Steelers scored touchdowns on 4 of their last 5 drives. Are you interested to see if they do something with Justin Fields in combination with Russell Wilson because he can run the ball so well?
I think logically that makes sense. I think a lot of people, myself included, expected to see that. There's a couple things with it, and this doesn't even rate as speculation. It's just there are quarterbacks, and they're not going to speak of it openly, publicly, but there are quarterbacks that if they're not going to start and they're not playing the quarterback position, they don't want to go on the field. Right. To a degree, it's fair. Justin Fields is a free agent. Mm-hmm. Now, not the starter of this team, barring injury. I'd argue that was always the case, but he got the opportunity to start. It's refreshing to hear him humbly say maybe he wasn't good enough in the time that he was in there. I think he did okay. I wouldn't put it on him. It's just more the starter came back from injury. He got his job back. Fields, though, might say, I'm not going to risk my future earning power carrying the ball in obvious run situations if I'm not the leader of the team, if I'm not the guy that you want to be in there on all 65 snaps. I'm not going to be a gimmick guy. I'm not going to set myself up with a bunch of running film where other teams that potentially might want to sign me look at me only as that.
Right.
Just my opinion. I'm not saying that's happening. I do think there's some twisted logic behind that. I don't know if that's a good idea, but I could see why he might say that. That said, I don't think Mike Tomlin is known as the most innovative when it comes to specialty packages, things of, as he would say, things of that nature. I do think he would really like to see, because he's been begging for this for 7 years now, is a goal line offense that can actually run the ball in the end zone.
Right.
I think he gave that a shot. I think that worked. I think you saw Russ take it in, which brings me to the other point of this. Maybe it's more of a Russ thing. Maybe Russ is saying, I'm going to show you I can do this. You don't need to bring me off the field for this. I want to be there. Plus, I can throw a pass. Right. Show that I can run in this situation as well. I'm much more dangerous. If you are limiting yourself to bring in Fields, probably just to run the ball, that doesn't make us better. If you have Fields throw the ball out of that, then why am I even here? So I think there's some internal politics that go with that. I will say this, though, to your point. They scored. Whether that's Russ's job or fault or whatever, they put the ball in the end zone. And, therefore it worked. I'm not a purely results-based guy. There's a process that's involved. It worked better against an abnormally better opponent than what they've seen to this point. So there's something to it, and I think if it works, then go with it. But situationally, if they have the type of matchup that they want up front, I would hope that everybody would be on board and saying we would do a better job here if we had Fields under center rather than Wilson. I don't think that's the end of the world. It's not an end-of-the-world type of conclusion to reach in this situation.
The Steelers get back-to-back bye weeks with the Giants and then nobody. Oh, what are you laughing at?
Poor Giants.
I didn't. But do you feel like the schedule's fallen in their favor right now to kind of so they can craft a record and get some confidence to go with it?
I think it fell in a way that they can do that, and with that, it's good that they're 5-2. You might argue, maybe should be 6-1 even. It's good right now to play a team like the Giants. It wouldn't surprise me if the Steelers blew them out and Brian Dable got fired after the game. It seems to be going that way right now for the Giants. They just benched their quarterback, who apparently is going to get the start again, which is always a very high sign of confidence. I'm sure everyone's behind whatever decision you make after you bench the quarterback, as Mike Tomlin knows. It's a good time to play them and go into a bye, but what goes up comes down. That's the reality of it. If you have a real nice set of your first 8 games, your back 9 games are going to be real tough. I'm choosing my words carefully here, but I think Cleveland improved this week.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yep.
You're going to get them without the detriment that they had on the field before. That's a better football team. Baltimore is playing phenomenal football right now. Cincinnati's a much better team than what their record is. You got to play those teams twice each. That's tough.
Right.
And you got to get at least 3 of them if you want to win that division. So it's going to get a lot better, but I think it falls well for the Steelers in the sense that, 1, you obviously got to play everybody that's on your schedule. 2, the better teams early, or the better teams later, I think is better for you in the sense that injuries are going to come to everybody. Figuring out who you are at your best. It's basically you're counting on your coaching staff to make the adjustments needed week in and week out to become a better team. And the Steelers, typically, for as crazy as their seasons have been, they've typically played pretty good football later in the year overall. So you get that benefit against better teams, obviously, but with enough of a head start, I think they can weather a few tough losses against good teams down the stretch and still be in a good spot because of them having the success that they've had early on in the season against teams that, it may not be all that good.
You are the best, sir. Thank you so much. Always appreciate every second we're together.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Neal Coolong, half hour brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors, Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Numbers Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com and News Radio 1070 WKOK. Today's show being brought to you by Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket, imports domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. 6 great flavors of slushies, pickle bar, led by my 2 personal favorites, the barrels and the dills, indeed second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. It's also your tailgating headquarters. It is always great to be joined by the incomparable Phil Steele. My friend, welcome back. Great to have you with us.
Hey, a real pleasure, Steve. I got to ask you, is your entrance theme always Enter Sandman or just after Virginia Tech games?
It always has been for about 12, 13 years now. I've used Enter Sandman.
I love it.
So it's been there, and the oddity is in 2020, Penn State was scheduled to play at Virginia Tech. Now, I've done basketball games at Virginia Tech. But, of course, that game in 2020 ended up being on the cancellation list. So I've never done a football game in Lane Stadium to hear Enter Sandman.
I tell you what, to me, it's one of the best entrances of college football.
Oh, I agree. That's why I was looking forward to it so much. Like, oh, really? Doggone pandemic, Phil. All right. Now, they don't do that for basketball, but football, it's obviously so cool. All right. So here we are at this stage. Midway through for Penn State, about the midway point for almost everybody else. So what has been your take? We'll start with the home team first, then we'll start spreading out. What's been your take on Penn State to this stage?
Pretty much as expected. I thought the West Virginia game, the right before the half, getting those key big pass plays, I think was key to them taking control of that game. The Illinois game, not quite as dominant as you wanted, needing a late score to win by 14, but you look at games statistically, they had a 374 to 219-yard edge. Probably the one game that would concern me would be USC, trailing the majority of the game, down by 14 at half. But I like the way they rebounded and came back and won. The defense is playing to expectations, holding opponents to 113 yards below their single season average. The run game has looked really good. Last 2 weeks struggled a little bit, but Singleton and Allen are a dynamic combo and get more big plays than last year. And Drew Lara at quarterback, while he's got 4 interceptions, which doubles the total from last year, yeah. I've been pretty impressed. So overall, I'm very happy with what I've seen out of Penn State, and they're pretty much as expected.
What's interesting is we're at the stage of the season now, Phil, where there are going to be some teams that fall into the 2-loss pool, which means to me they have to be perfect the rest of the way. One could end up being Georgia. Definitely one of Alabama or Tennessee will be when the weekend is over with. How interested are you in that 2-loss pool once this weekend comes and goes?
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see 2-loss teams make the playoff this year. No doubt about that. Yep. The question is, will a 3-loss team make the playoff? But I think it, like you mentioned, once you lose that second game, you do have to play perfect the rest of the season. We'll see some teams weed themselves out of the mix. A couple of weeks ago, it seemed like Tennessee and Mississippi were locks to make the playoff. Now, with a couple of losses and maybe upcoming losses, they may be out of the mix. So it's just a lot of fun at this point. And I still think we're going to see the majority of the playoff teams are going to come from the SEC and the Big Ten.
So let's get to the SEC. Texas is going to take, they've got Georgia. Texas is number one, and it's not as if they've been unscathed. Quinn Ewers has been out. They've had to come up with other running backs. What has impressed you about Texas?
Well, just overall the way they take care of business. I mean, every single opponent they have beaten just like they should have. They don't really let up on anybody and haven't played down to the level of their competition at all. So you got to like that. I guess the one thing I'm wondering about with Texas, I know their defense is playing extremely well, 230 yards per game, holding opponents to 129 yards per game below their season average. But my big question is, who have they played offensively? Probably the top offense they faced, at least statistically this year, is UTSA. Everybody ranks in the lower part of the standings. Now they're taking on a pretty good offense in Georgia. I'm really interested in that part of the battle.
Yeah, I am too, because Carson Beck has had some big games to this stage of the season, and we know Georgia has talent. But at the same time, when you watch the first 2.5 quarters of the Alabama game, what concerned you about Georgia when they played Bama?
Overall, with Georgia this year, it is the fact their defense is not as dominant as it has been in recent years. I think that's probably the biggest thing that jumps out to me. Go back to last year. They held opponents to 102 yards per game below their season average, which was number 1 in the country. Now this year they're actually number 25 in the country, and a top 25 defense is nice, but with Georgia you're accustomed to them having a dominant top defense, probably the best defense in the country. So that's my biggest question mark at this point is their defense going to come around and start playing like you would expect Georgia? I think Georgia's a national title contender if their defense is in the top 5 or 10, not if their defense is in the top 25.
What helped me out is on the trip back from Los Angeles, we did have TVs in the plane, so I could watch Ohio State play Oregon. The interesting part to me, and I want to get your read on this, long time ago here, Penn State, 1982, plays Nebraska. And Penn State won in the final seconds on a touchdown pass from Todd Blackledge to Alan Bowman's father, Kirk Bowman. And Penn State wins the game. But it was a game if you were there. Penn State had 2 touchdowns called back. Penn State missed 4 field goals. He even missed an extra point after the winning touchdown. All right? They could have won the game by a lot more. I watched Oregon and felt the same way, that they had stuff. They made so many mistakes. They took points off the board. They actually could have, in my opinion, could have won by more. Did you share that same opinion?
Yeah, I do. I also think you could say Ohio State could have easily won the game. So it's one of those things. But the one thing, Steve, that jumped out to me in this game is coming into it, you expected Ohio State to dominate the line of scrimmage, right? Because they've got one of the top offensive lines, one of the top defensive lines in the country. I thought Oregon had the offense and defensive line edge, and they were without their top defensive lineman coming in, with Birch being out for the game. I thought was huge coming into the game. So I thought the line of scrimmage, I would agree with you in that factor, that Oregon played a better than expected game. And you have to give them the quarterback edge in something like that. I mean, Dylan Gabriel is one of the top quarterbacks in the country. Will Howard is good, but I don't think he's Dylan Gabriel.
No, and I agree. I think that makes a big difference, especially I feel like Gabriel makes great decisions. He's accurate with the ball. I love his decision-making, and decision-making includes times when to run the ball. Him.
Right.
And I think that makes that when you do that, especially in the red zone, defensively you have to commit somebody to Gabriel. If you have a guy that's a pocket passer, you don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at Oregon at the start of the year, they were sort of interchanging their offensive line a little bit, because against Idaho and against Boise State, they weren't dominant. They gave up 7 sacks. They only averaged 3 yards per carry. But they finally got the offensive line rotation up to the standard I thought they would be coming into the year. And they've played a lot better the last 4 games, and I think that's been the difference in Oregon's offense and makes them a legitimate national title contender.
Okay, so I want to turn the clock back to early in the season with Oregon. They played Boise State. Ashton Genty had more yards individually rushing in the game than Ohio State did on Saturday night against Oregon by about 52 yards. The group of 5 is going to get a team in. What's been your thought on Boise State? What's your thought on him as a running back?
Pretty electric. So many big plays and big runs for Ashton Genty. And, like you go back 2 weeks ago against Utah State, he had all his yards in the first half, didn't even play in the second half. So in the magazine, I had Boise as my number 1 group of 5 team to make the playoff this year, and they've made me pretty happy. I think they're going to live up to that. Now, they do have a tough test coming up where they play UNLV next week on the road. That's probably the biggest. Well, it is the biggest, toughest remaining game that they have on the schedule. But if they take care of business against UNLV, I think it's between Boise State and Tulane for that spot. Tulane's been pretty impressive as well this year, but right now I'd have Boise number 1.
Yeah, and that's the Friday night game, so that's going to be the UNLV Boise game. To me, that's a must watch. Well, let's get to it. An undefeated that nobody's talking about. Indiana. All right. They're undefeated. I'm not saying that they're going to get anywhere, but what's been your thought on the job that they've done there?
It's pretty much what I had expected. Not quite to this degree. Well, probably to this degree. In fact, in the Big Ten media poll, Indiana was picked 17th.
Yeah.
And everybody asks me every year, Steve, they say, Phil, do you have a favorite team? And I go, yes, I have a favorite team. And they go, who is it? I go, it's a team I picked higher than everybody else. So as it was, everybody picked them 17th. I had them 12th in the Big Ten. And there I hedged my bet a little bit, thinking, well, I can't pick them any higher than that, can I? But I've been an Indiana fan all year. They're playing great defense. Yeah. They've got all those James Madison transfers, and they've lived up to that potential. They've got the run game with Ellison, Lawton, and Black. Curtis Rourke, who was the MAC Offensive Player of the Year 2 years ago, looks like it. He's hitting 74% with a 14-2 ratio. Now, keep in mind they haven't really played anybody. Maryland, probably the toughest opponent that they played. They're going to take on a really good opponent this week in Nebraska. Nebraska's got a legitimate defense. Huntmaker leads that defensive line, which is just nasty up front. And I like what I've seen out of Dylan Raiola as well. So I think we're going to learn a lot about these two teams this year. Indiana's having a great year. Signetti's doing a great job. And, the thing I like about Signetti, Steve, is that in the transfers he's brought in, they not only had to have experience, they had to have, be a conference player of the year experience type of thing. So he brought in the right guys. I think the NIL money that they promised Signetti at the start of the year really helped.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And for Nebraska, they've only lost the one game to Illinois. And it was one of those games where I felt like they lost the game more than, quote, Illinois won it. So Matt Rule's done some good things there. Now let's get to a team that lost on opening day, Clemson. Clemson was behind, I think, 6-0 at halftime, because I'm trying to do that from memory only because I was doing the West Virginia-Penn State game at the time. They have not lost since. Now, I realize they're not facing, quote, murderer's row. But what do you think of Clemson now at this stage, and how dangerous are they to get to the playoff?
No, I think they will make the playoff this year, and you're absolutely correct. It was 6-0 at the half, close game. And what happened was, I think Dabo was a little reluctant to play his freshman wide receivers in that game. And then all of a sudden, after that loss to Georgia, he said, you know what, we're going to bring out Brian Wesco, we're going to bring out T.J. Moore, two of the highest rated wide receivers coming out of high school this year, and they both have made a major impact on that receiving core. With that receiving core now getting the upgrade. And remember last year with Clemson, coming into the year, in the first 3 games, they had lost their top 2 wide receivers. So they were really a depleted receiving core. Those guys are back. They've added in the freshmen. Tremendous receiving core. Cade Klubnik has looked like you would have thought he would look coming out of high school, 17-2 ratio. Now that he's got the receiving core, they've got Phil Moff in the backfield. The defense, I was surprised Stanford gained 230 yards on them in the first half, but other than that, they've been really good, and they've got plenty of talent there. So it's a very dangerous Clemson team. I look at the rest of their schedule. At Virginia Tech, ironically, Enter Sandman, is the only place that they could potentially lose, I think. I do think they beat Pitt on the road, and I've got Clemson playing in the ACC title game. Yeah, no, I think that is a great pick. Miami is sitting there as well. They've had a little bit of officiating help along the way. The replay guys have been, I would say, kind to them, but overall level of play outside of that with Cam Ward at the controls, your thoughts? Yeah, I think what's going to happen with Miami this week, Steve, is you're going to see them look the best they have all season. There's not going to be a close game. I think they go on the road and get this one. Yep. Louisville's pass defense has been a little suspect, at least in my mind. Yep. I thought Louisville got outplayed by Georgia Tech. Notre Dame, they trailed by 2 touchdowns. Smooth, they lost by 7 at home. And they need a late touchdown to get past Virginia. Miami's had a week off. I think they feel fortunate that they're 6-0 after the Virginia Tech and Cal games. I mean, Cal, they needed a 25-point comeback. But with Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, and a very confident group, I look for Miami to play their best game of the year this week. Yeah, no, I agree. I think they've put themselves in that spot, and I think they will play exactly the way you thought they would play. Tennessee has hit a little bit of a skid here at this point, and the odd part to me is, with Josh Heupel's mind, it's the offense. I think the defense has been playing pretty well. What's been your thought on them, especially with the matchup with Alabama? Yeah, and, with Tennessee, the key for a Josh Heupel offense everybody thinks it's a pass game. It's actually the run game. If they're running for 250 yards, then guess what? Everything's wide open. Yeah. Teams have to bring another guy in the box. That gives you a lot of one-on-ones, and that's when their offense is so explosive. 69, 51, 71 points the first 3 games. But the last 3 games have all been under 200 yards rushing, and that's where their offense tends to struggle. And I think Bama's got the players in the defensive front 7 to control Tennessee's run game and put the onus on Nico Iamaleava. And, when you look at Tennessee, they should have been down probably 17-0 at the half to Florida. Florida had 4 drives inside the red zone. They fumbled at the 1-yard line, got stopped on downs, kicked a field goal, and had it taken off the board for too many men on the field, and only had 3 points at the half. So they could have actually lost to Florida last week on top of losing to Arkansas the week before. Now, I'm not going to say Alabama's been dominant the last 2 weeks. No. In fact, ever since halftime of the Georgia game, they haven't looked good the last 10 quarters. No. But I've seen Alabama against Georgia. I know they're capable of playing it. And I'll take Jalen Milroe over the freshman quarterback. I think Alabama's a better team, goes into Tennessee and comes out of there with a win.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I mentioned Oregon, Ohio State earlier. Ohio State is massively talented. We know that. What's been your thought on them to this point?
It's the same question I had coming into the year, Steve. Defensive line, they've got so many top draft picks there. You would expect that defensive line to be getting 4 or 5 sacks every single game.
Agreed.
How many sacks they have against Oregon? None. And on the offensive line, they've got the talent there, but they're not overwhelming. Last week, as you mentioned, Boise ran for more yards against Oregon than Ohio State did. So I think it's the line play has been a little disappointing. And I would say, to me, it's the defensive line does not add up to the sum of the parts. They have really good guys on the defensive line. The NFL is going to love these guys, but they're not playing like it.
Right, and that's exactly what we were talking about the other day. That's been a surprise. If I just give you the names, you would assume they're playing great. Yet when you watch them, they're playing well, but not great. Is that fair?
Yes, not dominant. And you would expect them to be a dominant. Remember that South Carolina-Kentucky game?
Yeah.
I don't know if you got a chance to watch it, but South Carolina's defensive front just chewed up Kentucky. Kentucky couldn't, every time their quarterback stepped back to pass, he was under pressure. They couldn't run the ball for an inch. And South Carolina's defensive line really impressed me in that game. That's what I would expect out of Ohio State on a weekly basis.
Hey, by the way, down in the Dome, Tech will take on Notre Dame. What's been your thought on those 2 teams to this point?
If Notre Dame keeps losing players every single week, it seems like they lose a different starter, but they're playing well. And I like the fact that Riley Leonard, remember he didn't have a touchdown pass the first couple of games. Now he's up to 6 on the year. They're taking care of business. They're playing well. With Georgia Tech, I think they play above the sum of their parts. They're one where they play better than the overall talent that they have with Brent Key. They're always dangerous as a dog, but I don't know if they're up to the talent level of Notre Dame. So I like the Irish to win this week. But I've been impressed with both teams.
You are a gem. Thank you so much for the time you gave us today because, look, you're always working on something and you always carve out a few minutes for us, and I appreciate it so much.
Steve, it's always great talking to you, my friend. Thanks for having me on, and good luck in the upcoming weeks.
Appreciate it, and we'll talk soon, I hope.
All right. Sounds good, Steve.
The outstanding Phil Steele joining us on the show today. And this half hour being brought to you by Brewers Outlet. Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket, imports domestics microbrews. The best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, lots and lots of snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. 6 great flavors of slushies. Pickle bar, led by the barrels and the dills. Indeed, second to none. It is all at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.